the vast, sun-scorched expanse of the 19th century American Southwest, life on the frontier was a fragile gamble. For the women and children living in isolated settlements, it was a world where the line between safety and terror could vanish in an instant. Their stories, often whispered or hidden in shame, paint a harrowing picture of survival against all odds. It's May 19, 1836, at Fort Parker, Texas. The air is thick with the sounds of a sudden, brutal raid. Amid the chaos, a 17-year-old girl named Rachel Plummer, 6 months pregnant, is seized. While her family members are attacked around her, she is pulled onto a horse and carried away into a life she could never have imagined. For the next 21 months, she would endure unimaginable hardship, even after her eventual return. When she wrote a memoir of her ordeal, she found some experiences were so distressing that she couldn't bring herself to describe them in full, cloaking them in a veil of shame and silence. Rachel's story, while horrifying, was not unique. Throughout the 1800s, raids on frontier settlements were a constant threat. Hundreds of women were taken captive across the Southwest. Some were eventually returned through negotiations or ransom. A few managed to escape during moments of confusion, but many were never seen again, their fates lost to the harsh wilderness. Even for those who came back, the physical and emotional scars lasted a lifetime. Newspapers of the era, while printing other violent news, often avoided publishing the full, grim details of what these women endured. Perhaps because the reality was too much for the public to bear. The accounts we have today come directly from the survivors themselves, documented in first-hand testimonies and memoirs that give voice to the unspeakable. The pattern of these raids was terrifyingly predictable. They often struck at dawn or dusk, when the low light offered cover and families were most vulnerable. Isolated homesteads were the primary targets, far from any hope of immediate help. The raiders would typically deal with the men first, swiftly eliminating any resistance. Then, they would select their captives. Women of working and childbearing age were seen as valuable assets for labor and trade. Young girls were also taken, as they could be more easily assimilated into a new life and culture. The elderly were usually left behind, unable to keep up with the brutal pace of the journey, and infants were considered a liability, their cries a potential beacon that could reveal the group's location to pursuers. Consider the ordeal of 14-year-old Olive Oatman. In February 1851, her family was traveling west along the Gila River when they were attacked. Olive and her 7-year-old sister, Marianne, were the only ones spared. Their captivity began immediately. Forced to march 4 miles through the harsh desert, they had no time to grieve. Olive later described walking barefoot over sharp rocks and thorns, a brutal pace enforced by the constant threat of punishment if they slowed down. Upon reaching their captor's camp, there was no rest, no time for recovery. Their life of forced labor began at once. The daily routine for captives was a grueling cycle of exhaustion. They were forced to haul water over long distances, gather firewood until their hands were raw and split, and dig for roots and other food under the relentless sun. Food was scarce and often consisted of whatever scraps were left over, if there was anything at all. Punishment was a constant, unpredictable threat. A captive could be beaten for working too slowly, for showing weakness, for speaking English with another prisoner, or sometimes for no clear reason at all. It was a life of relentless toil and fear. For Ollie's little sister, Marianne, the hardship was too much. She grew weaker and weaker, and within a year, she was gone. The physical and psychological toll was immense. Matilda Lockhart was captured in 1838 at TIE of 13 and held for 2 years. When she was finally returned during a negotiation in San Antonio, the officials who received her were horrified by her condition. A witness, Mary Maverick, later wrote that Matilda's injuries were so severe they were difficult to describe. The constant, cruel discipline was designed not just for control, but to inflict humiliation and suffering. Matilda never fully recovered from her ordeal. She died just 2 years after her release, around the age of 15. Fire and heat were also wielded as tools of terror. Captives described it being used for both routine punishment and as a form of retaliation. In March of 1840, a peace meeting in San Antonio turned violent, and and several Comanche leaders were killed by Texas officials. The retribution for this event fell not on the soldiers, but on the helpless captives held in the Comanche camps. Survivors reported that multiple prisoners, including a very young child, were tortured with fire as a message of revenge. For many new captives, the ordeal began with a terrifying ritual known as running the gauntlet. They were forced to run between two lines of warriors, who would strike them with clubs and whips as they passed. The goal was to reach the end without collapsing. This brutal practice served as a form of celebration for the warriors, a source of entertainment, and a test of the captives' endurance. Rachel Plummer endured this more than once. Survivors learned quickly that showing pain often invited worse treatment, while a display of defiance could sometimes earn a grudging respect, and perhaps slightly less harsh treatment. Not every woman's path was the same. Some were taken as wives and assigned to a specific warrior. On the surface, this life could appear less brutal. They might have better access to food, be spared from random punishments, and have a defined role within the tribe's social structure. But it's crucial to remember that this was never a choice. It was another form of coercion, and while some women eventually adapted as a survival strategy, it was a life built on force, not consent. The story of Cynthia Ann Parker is perhaps one of the most famous and complex. Captured at age 9 during the same 1836 Fort Parker raid as her cousin Rachel Plummer, Cynthia Ann would spend the next 24 years living with the Comanche. She learned their language, adopted their culture, and completely assimilated. She married a prominent leader, Peter Nokana, and had 3 children with him, including the future renowned chief, Quanah Parker. When Texas Rangers rescued her in 1860, she didn't see it as a rescue at all. She was a Comanche woman, and she fought desperately to stay with her family. For Cynthia Ann, her return to Texas society was a second captivity. She spent the rest of her life grieving for her husband and sons, repeatedly trying to escape and return to them. She never succeeded. Heartbroken, she died in 1870, her grief deepening after the death of her young daughter from illness. The pain of separation from family was a constant theme. Rachel Plummer, who was pregnant when captured, gave birth to a baby boy in captivity. For a brief time, she was able to care for him, a small light in her dark world. But her captors soon took the infant away, claiming he slowed down her work. She never saw her baby alive again. Years later, her other son, James, who was taken in the same raid, was finally ransomed in 1842. But after 6 years with the Comanche, the little boy had forgotten his birth family, his language, and his own name. Olive Oatman was eventually released after 5 years, having been traded to the Mojave people. Her experience was complicated. She had been partially adopted into the tribe, and her face bore the tribe's distinctive chin tattoo. But she was never truly free. When she arrived at Fort Yuma in 1856, she was severely underweight and struggled to speak English. Her story made her famous, leading to a popular book and a series of public lectures. She later married and tried to live a quiet life, but the past never left her. It said her husband went to great lengths to buy and destroy copies of her memoir, hoping to shield her from the painful memories. For the rest of her life, Olive reportedly kept a small jar of mesquite seeds, a tangible reminder of the food that sustained her during her years in the desert. By the 1870s, the lines on the frontier had blurred significantly. It's estimated that a large portion of the Comanche, Kiowa, and Apache communities had captive ancestry. The reality of the frontier was far more complex than a simple story of good versus evil. Some captives, like Cynthia Ann Parker, fully assimilated and had no desire to return. Others came back carrying deep and lasting trauma nightmares, debilitating fears, and an inability to speak about what they had endured. And many more simply vanished, their names recorded in dusty ledgers, their families left with a lifetime of unanswered questions and grief. These stories are not easy to hear, but they are essential. They remind us that the frontier was an unforgiving environment where survival itself was a victory. The women who lived through these experiences were victims, but they were also witnesses. Their silence, their scars, and their fragmented memories speak volumes about the depth of their trauma. Forgetting their stories would be to erase a painful but vital part of history. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow for more stories that deserve to be remembered.